Welcome to the Antidot podcast. You know, life is just too short to be spending your precious gift of time in this world held back by anxiety and fear and worry, stuck in those limiting mental loops, replaying the past, worried about the future, doom scrolling through the social media loops and the news again and again, just trying to escape yourself. Well, fortunately, there's so much you can do to solve this stuff and rewire your brain and your life without pills or apps or elaborate meditation practices, just using a combination of cutting edge cognitive approaches and helped by evidence based nutrition and supplements. Much of it is surprisingly little known. So, on the Antidot podcast, we bring some of the world's most impressive experts, practitioners, and thinkers in their fields to uncover new ways to reboot your brain and optimize your experience of life beyond what you thought was possible. Antidot is 100% free, so be sure to subscribe to this podcast so that you don't miss an episode, and also check out the Antidot website for the latest breakthroughs, instantly calming quick reliefs, free Antidot weekly newsletters, and much more at www.theantidote.com. That's antidote spelled without the E at the end. www.theantidote.com. It's a great segue to our guest, Kate Jackson. I'm thrilled to have Kate on the show. Kate is the founder of Enso Wellbeing Coaching. Her work centers on helping clients develop self-awareness to empower greater health and well-being and resilience. And her tools include something called the Enneagram, which we're going to talk about later today. Kate is a really interesting case. Kate has actually experienced firsthand the challenges that come from dealing with some really, really tough things in life. So stage 4 cancer diagnosis and a divorce, and all around the same time. But what really sets Kate apart beyond just the tough life experience here is her academic pedigree is so interesting. So she has a national board certification in health and wellness coaching and a master's in integrative health and well-being coaching from the University of Minnesota. She's also a Skidmore grad and has an MBA. So Kate, it really combines her academic background and her knowledge and experience with the firsthand tough challenges that she went through in life. And a lot of people have one or the other, and it's really, really fascinating to see how Kate has combined everything that she's been through and learned to build what she's doing at Enso. And so she really is all about helping people cultivate self-awareness and apply a lot of tools and learning to dealing with some of these challenges that we're all dealing with right now more than ever. So Kate, welcome to the show. Thanks for being here.
Yeah, thanks, Paul. Thanks so much for having me. It's fun.
Well, listen, I'd love to start with, tell us a little bit about, without going into painful detail to recount painful memories, but let's start with, you out of the blue got this cancer diagnosis, right? So tell us a little bit about that and some of the, the mental challenges that you faced right away from dealing with news like that.
Sure. Yeah. I mean, I was a healthy 30-something-year-old and had some side pain, and my father had recently died within the previous 2 years of pancreatic cancer. And I just kind of had this inkling of maybe I should go to the doctor and make sure it's nothing more than I think it is. And really, I just thought it was issues with food. Something was twerking with me. And it turned out that I ended up with this stage 4 cancer diagnosis. They didn't know it until I got into the surgery room. I had major surgery. And so I pretty much entered into this whole process on my heels. There was nothing I planned for. I didn't really know what I was up against. I didn't understand what was going to happen. I didn't understand, even though I understood the surgery, what might happen. I didn't know the extent of it. Yeah. And it just kind of a terrible way to enter into surgery from a mindset standpoint. And then from a recovery standpoint too, it really set me back. So it was an interesting experience. And I certainly have learned a tremendous amount from it.
Absolutely. And how was the timing around the divorce as well? I think, was it around the same time period that was happening?
It was a few years later, but what was interesting was for me, the recovery from my surgery was supposed to be 8 weeks.
Yeah.
And it really was 3 years. And the reason for that was because I had such tremendous side effects and symptoms from, something that saved my life. But of course, when you have something that dramatic, it creates some other issues. And so I had a lot of brain fog. I really wasn't able to operate in the way that I was used to. And I cognitively couldn't operate in the way I was used to. And so it just created a lot of crumbling, I guess, with a marriage, of trying to figure out how to show up and how to be supportive. And we did the best we could, but it certainly made an impact. It wasn't the whole reason for the divorce, but
Of course.
so that came a few years later, once I had, struggled for so long and trying to get myself back to where I was used to being, which was a very healthy, outgoing person prior to that.
Right, absolutely. And it's so interesting because so many people deal with challenges in life, whether it's a health issue or a loved one passing away, and those can have very real effects on your marriage. And so one of the kind of the most common things that you hear about, and people who have been through divorces know, is that it can take, honestly, a trigger like that is completely even unrelated to your relationship, puts strain in myriad ways on the relationship and just makes it harder and harder and harder. And that happens all the time. But for you to experience both of those things in sequence, it must have really been incredibly challenging. I suppose if there's a silver lining, it's that this led you to a series of breakthrough insights and a real passion for the self-awareness work that you embarked on after. So tell us a little bit about that transition.
Yeah, I often joke that it took me multiple 2x4s over up and say, okay, I need to do something to change the way I'm living. And, I felt like I had a pretty good life, but I think, what I discovered was there's a lot of things I didn't know about myself. It was very not self-aware. So I was leading a good life, but there was a lot of authenticity that was missing from me. And so it forced me into that. And part of that was just coming out of Western medicine and having success from a standpoint of it saved my life,
Yes.
but then having this huge gap of lack of healing because I just simply didn't know about resources that were available to help me heal outside of Western medicine. And they couldn't do anything more. They gave me medication and they gave me surgery. That was it. And so I just was not familiar with other opportunities to heal. And so it wasn't until I met a kinesiologist, which I didn't even understand what a kinesiologist did.
Yeah.
She did some muscle testing on me with food under my tongue. And I always say, if I had not been in that room, I would not have believed the story, but it was dramatic.
Wow.
And within 2 weeks, I felt better than I'd ever felt before. And it launched this desire to want to find other resources that are available. And frankly, for me, I think the biggest thing that has been the turnaround is finding the resources that help my mental well-being. So it's really more the self-awareness and cultivating that self-awareness for resiliency more than anything else that's out there. And there's so many great resources. But for me personally, that's been the biggest piece that has really helped me. And I will tell you too, that 7 years after my diagnosis, I ended up with a recurrence of my cancer and had to go through a very similar major surgery. And it was night and day for me because I had built up and started cultivating some resources and skill sets for myself that helped me mentally and emotionally and be able to regulate my emotions. So I went into that surgery feeling so much more empowered because I knew I had resources and I knew how to use them and I'd already built a foundation. So the prep, the during and the post surgery was like complete night and day from my first surgery. And it was really profound for me to have those two experiences and be able to compare the two and know just how much that mental well-being is just so important for these kinds of things.
Wow, that's fascinating. And I think what you went through is what a lot of people go through when they have a health issue and they experience the benefits of Western medicine while also experiencing the limits of it. And it's not a knock against Western medicine and saying that, it's either Western or not. There's a false dichotomy or a false binary that a lot of people sort of think that, oh, you either have to reject Western medicine and say, oh, all the solutions are completely on the other side, or vice versa. And so there's a lot of dogmatism that exists on both sides, really unnecessarily. It really comes down ultimately to two things: evidence, right, number one. And so the problem with non-Western medicine is that there has been much less of a profit motive involved to do the kinds of clinical studies and placebo-controlled trials and things like that you see typically when you have a pharmaceutical company funding these things. And so the existing Western model is such that there's an entire virtuous cycle where you do get a lot of these studies and evidence, and it all supports that existing sort of framework. On the other side, a lot of either whether it's traditional or, kind of more holistic or, natural solutions for things, or just purely cognitive approaches, just mental learning. It's really hard either in many cases to quantify those things in a true sort of clinical setting, or there just simply isn't the profit motive, and therefore you don't have the evidence, and therefore it is easily dismissed. But as Carl Sagan said famously, just because there isn't evidence doesn't mean that there can't be evidence that exists, or that this thing may be real. There just isn't evidence yet. The flip side of that, though, of course, you can't use that to say, well, I can believe anything I want in the world. There just isn't evidence for it yet. Like the world is flat, but there's no evidence. So it's a tricky balance. But what you went through is really the perfect case of integrative, right? You got the benefits of the Western medicine, the latest technology to help kind of cure or solve your cancer, but then you learn all the other tools on the other side that the Western medical system simply is ill-equipped, or just not equipped at all. They're simply not trained on these things to do. And you got the benefits there. So going into it later, you were far more sort of bulletproof than you were the first time around, and can kind of come out of an experience like that in a far better shape. So that's really, really just a case in point study. And I hope people out there really realize that there is no sort of false binary between Western or not. You should do what works, and also what works for you, and be open-minded into what might work. As you said with your kinesiology example, right? You would have never believed these things until you saw them work for you. So fascinating. So tell us how that led to actually you were deciding to say, this is what I want to do next in my work, in my career. I believe in this stuff so much that I want to create, a company around it and create Enso.
Well, what the beginning of Enso Wellbeing Coaching started after my first diagnosis. When I came out of surgery, spent a month recovering, went back to my oncologist to have a conversation around what was next. And the conversation we had, and I really liked my oncologist, but he basically, read me this litany of side effects that I was going to be dealing with, and proceeded to say, there's nothing more we can do for you because we've done surgery, we've given you the medication we can, but outside of that, good luck, and we'll see you in 3 months for your next scan. And I vividly remember the moment, because I remember leaving his office and I stood on the sidewalk and I sat there and thought, wow, I'm a well-educated woman. I'm advocating and asking questions to help me, and I don't know where I'm going next. I have no idea how I'm going to heal from this. And all I kept thinking was, what happens to those people that do not do that, don't feel comfortable asking questions, or don't advocate for themselves? And so I immediately felt this just drive for doing something around advocacy work and medical advocacy. And that was all that was in my brain at that point in time. So the seed was planted. I had no idea how I was going to get there, because I had been in marketing for most of my life. And so the transition from marketing into healthcare I had no idea how I might do that. So it kind of sat in a quiet space for about 6 years. And I serendipitously sort of happened upon the University of Minnesota's program for integrative health and wellbeing coaching. And I really had no desire to go back to school again. I already had a master's in business administration, and I did not want to go back to school, but I wanted to hear about what it was that they were doing and understand what this is. And within 5 minutes, it was like, that's what I've been wanting to do for 6 years. And if I can change and make a positive impact on somebody that might be in my position, or just people that are in daily life who don't know these resources because we don't talk about them, that would be phenomenal. So it was the trajectory that led me down that path. And then there was a program to be able to really give me the background and the training so that I could make that transition and do it in a way that would be beneficial.
A lot of the issues that we're seeing are around this kind of ambient anxiety or ambient kind of worry. Oftentimes people don't know why specifically, or they have a general unease about the future or about where things are going. And it's sort of a constant sort of feeling uneasy, feeling a little worried, feeling anxious. In some cases, it's more severe and acute than that. And it's full-blown panic attacks and things like that. And people find themselves, again, this ties so much to the social media and looking for ways to escape. So they're doom scrolling, they're on social media, they're reading the news, they're looking for that next kind of dopamine hit. And a lot of that is just trying to get out of your own head and solve and give yourself some temporary little pleasure or little dopamine hits, because you're dealing with this constant sort of unease, this uncertainty about the future and where you're going. Tell us how you sort of help to address some of those feelings that you had in what was clearly a really scary period for you with a lot of unknowns, and really changing your entire vector of your life in ways that you couldn't predict. How did you personally deal with some of those things?
Well, before I even talk about me specifically, I will talk broader level, because I
Right.
think this is what is so many people are struggling with now with all the uncertainty around the pandemic, which is, as a culture, we are not very good at just being quiet with ourselves. It's uncomfortable because we are so used to distractions. We are so used to being able to quickly exit if we start feeling uncomfortable from anything. And so I think this idea of, as a culture, we don't know how to be with ourselves is a real problem. And it's a big part of, I think, what's creating this anxiety that's sort of a constant in our lives.
Yeah.
And that certainly was the case for me. I think I was almost unconscious of the anxiety because it was so sort of there all the time for me. And so I really had to do a deep dive into staying in the muck, is what I always called it. Like, I need to go into that dark hole where I don't know what's going to happen exactly. And it's super scary and it's a big ledge, but I'm going to go in there because the status quo is not working well for me. So I need to try something different, and it might be something pretty major. And so I kind of like got myself to the precipice of the ledge, and then I dove in, and it was pretty murky. But I stayed with it. I stayed with the murk, and I gave myself a little grace within that to start to learn how to be curious about what was going on for me. Why was I feeling this way? What was causing it? Was it me causing it, or was it somebody else causing it? Because I think oftentimes we externally put on others and project on others what's creating anxiety for us, when really it's our own minds that are probably creating our own suffering. But we don't know. We don't even see it. We're not conscious of it because it's such a pattern. So a lot of my most basic things that helped me initially was breath work.
Yeah.
It's so simple, but we forget to breathe. And I tell clients this all the time: when you are breathing into your chest and you're shallow breathing, that's actually causing your system to send anxious thoughts to your head. And then it's anxious thoughts because I'm not breathing. So it's a cycle that happens. And we're not even aware that we're not breathing down into our bellies. So if we can pause and take, this is what I do. If I'm feeling anxious and I feel the anxiety starting to take over, I kind of grab something that's very grounded or heavy so that I can stay in one position. I take 3 deep breaths in through my nose, out through my mouth. And while it doesn't make everything go away, it shifts my brain just enough to recognize that, wow, I was kind of like going off into a place that was not going to help me at all. And now I have a little bit more cognitive ability to make a better decision moving forward to help me out of this space. But I think that most of the time when people start feeling that anxiety swirl, they quickly shift to something that can entertain them or make them feel better, whether it's food or it's TV or it's just being on the couch. And while that may be a temporary fix, it's the underlying issue is still there. And unless we open that up and get a sense for what that means for us and how we can behave around that and how we can make some changes for ourselves, that self-awareness, it's really hard to make any changes long term.
That is so well said. I think that is going to apply to literally everyone who listens to this podcast and to the Antidote audience. I mean, I think you really hit the nail on the head. We look for those escapes. We don't know why we have this sort of ambient anxiety. And I love your analogy about diving into the muck. I mean, that really hits the nail on the head with regard to what people need to actually do is to get to the truth, to get to the root. And one of the things that we actually talked about recently on the website is about the need to actually dive into that muck. I love your analogy. In fact, it's much better than how we articulated it. It's the need to get to the truth is sort of is how we phrase it. If you really keep digging and keep saying, and then what? And then why is that? And then why is that? To really get to the root first principles, the causes behind what you're feeling and why, it's really revealing, and it's actually very freeing and empowering when you can go below the surface and say, you know what? it turns out I'm actually not really anxious about that thing I thought I was, that surface level thing. It's actually much deeper. And oftentimes we finally go to a place where, you know what, it's actually at the end of the day, I'm afraid of dying. But then you can go further than that and say, why am I afraid of dying? Well, it may be because I haven't done the things I want to do in my life yet. And I'm afraid that I will die with the best inside of me. For example, you go really, really, really deep like that, and what it reveals so many things around what you need to maybe change or prioritize differently, or what's actually important. And you can make some very fundamental changes in your life and assumptions, that are very different from just looking at the surface layer. And so it sounds like you went through that process. You dove into that muck, and you came out from that muck by staying in it and really learning from what's in there and the lessons. And you came out the other end completely changed, right? And with a different set of principles.
Well, and I think that's the important piece too for that is I think so many of us stop before we get into the muck because we're so afraid we won't get out on the other side. And so we
Absolutely.
aren't even giving ourselves the opportunity to know that we can get out on the other side.
Mhm.
And for the most part, we do get out on the other side. We don't know what that's going to look like. And so we're so afraid because we don't actually know what that's going to look like that we stop ourselves short. And just what you were saying, there's a lot of freedom in that. I found tremendous freedom by going in the muck, being, it wasn't this perfect idyllic space, but it was a space that allowed me to learn about myself and grow in self-awareness, so that when I was able to move through that and get to the other side, there was so much burden that came off from my life. And I felt so free from so much that had been playing in my head and playing, frankly, in my anxieties. I never could have imagined that. Never ever could have imagined that. But that's for me now. Like, where's the muck? Let me go in there. Like, I want to get in there as fast as possible because I know that there's going to be something great on the back side of it. But we don't give ourselves enough faith in that we actually will be able to get through that. We create so much fear in our own minds that it stops us from growing. And it's just such a shame, because I think that is something, if people can have more faith in themselves and in their resilience and practice it so that they can say, yeah, I did make it through that. I'm okay. It wasn't easy, but it was freeing for me. And I'm so glad I did that. That's certainly been my experience.
Absolutely. And I've had a similar experience personally going into the muck. Same thing. In fact, I now, much like you, I actually look for opportunities to get to the truth. I will even tell myself, get to the truth. What's the truth of the situation, right? Let's get to the true first principles, the underlying reality objectively, and being very honest with myself too. Sometimes, it's very easy to sort of lie to yourself or say, oh, it's actually not really this way, because that's what you kind of want to hear. If you really can try to stay much like a scientist, very objective, very curious, very non-judgmental, which again is a bit of a stoic concept as well, and really get to the objective truth, the truly inarguable, objective, empirical truth of a situation or something in your life. It's funny. It sounds like it will be scary, but it's actually freeing, as you said. You felt lighter in your example. That's how people feel when they go through this process and they can get to this truth, and they do that work and they get in there and they really internalize it and think about it, and they say, well, if this is really true, maybe it's not what I really sort of wanted to hear, but you know what, actually that's not so bad, and here's what I can do about it, or here's what I can do differently to make X, Y, and Z more of a priority in my life. And that is so freeing, right? I've even seen examples of people who just literally are, they feel like an entire weight was lifted off their shoulders and their anxiety is just gone, especially in the moment too. Especially they're like, God, I just feel like I took a pill or something. Like, it literally is just this incredible relief. So it's such powerful stuff. And again, no meds required. This is cognitive work that you're doing, which is it's just a reminder of how powerful cognitive behavioral therapy and doing this kind of mental work is. So tell us, that's a great segue to your work, your tools, your methodology. Tell us a bit about, all the stuff that you've been through and learned. You actually have put some structure around and built tools and programming around how to go through these processes to get to those breakthroughs. So tell us a little bit about the Enso program, and how that works.
Yeah. So, I mean, as you kind of mentioned at the beginning, my work really focuses on self-awareness. So there's a wide spectrum of health and well-being coaching out there. I'm probably less on the physical health side and more on the mental and emotional well-being. And that's just by nature of my experience, my background, and my passion. And so when people come to me, regardless of their situation, it's really about helping them become more self-aware so they can build in empowerment and choice in their life. And a lot of times when people come to me, they're coming with an issue where they're just stuck. They either don't know how to get started, or they've been sort of spinning their wheels on something, or they're afraid to get started. It can be a number of things, but to try to have conversation with them around sort of like a more holistic viewpoint of whatever their life is. So it's not just let's go right to the problem, but let's talk about your life holistically and get a sense for, what are some of your patterns? What are things that are happening in your life? What are triggers for you? And asking in a way that's really a safe space to talk about it. I'm always amazed how quickly people can be open and be vulnerable when you give them a space that feels safe. And so much can happen and so much transformation can happen in those kinds of spaces because people are able to say things out loud, which is getting it out of your head, getting it outside of you. Yes. And oftentimes I'll reflect what people say and they will hear it and they'll be like, did I just say that? And, it can be really profound for people to even have that little bit of a shift to recognize, wow, I've been saying that to myself. How does that impact me? How is that impacting my ability to change? How is that impacting my ability to have choice in my life? Going back to the muck, right? If we go into the muck and we come out the other side, we've just given ourselves more choice moving forward. So when people are stuck, I think that's, they lack choice, and that creates anxiety because suddenly now I'm stuck and I don't have choices anymore and I'm limited. And that can create us feeling like we're caged in. So really this building of self-awareness and this empowerment. I mean, that's probably the biggest thing for me. I felt disempowered when I went into my first cancer surgery. I was totally on my heels. I didn't know what to ask for. I didn't know what to think about to help me on the back end of it or at the front end of it or during or anything. And so I felt super disempowered, and I felt so disempowered for so many years after that. And it wasn't until I started recognizing and paying attention to and learning about and trying and experimenting with different resources that allowed me to gain empowerment for myself and be the most accountable I could be for myself, as opposed to hoping somebody else might for me. It feels so good to be empowered like that.
Absolutely. And I think what's so interesting is that not only did you go through that journey yourself with self-discovery and actually living the stuff yourself, as opposed to just taking a purely academic approach. Sometimes people who do research or maybe are therapists or psychologists will do a lot of research, or they will learn about these things sort of secondhand. But many times they haven't lived through the life experience like you have. And so it's a very, very different experience to go through these things firsthand, and to be able to then build tools and learning and processes based on real world experience that only you can really understand how to best communicate, and you can really help to tie the dots together, right? To connect the dots for people around how these things actually can be applicable in a real way in your life, not just in a sort of an academic thing like here, try X, Y, and Z, but actually taking them through a process that has very palpable, kind of a real tie and connection to what they were actually going through. And that's where I think that the combination of your life experience with the tools and academic background are truly unique, and I think just kind of a superpower.
Well, and I think too, to that point, one of the things that gets me very fired up when I start talking about it is the culture that we live in, which is basically we have been so well trained as we've grown up to look externally for the fix.
Yes.
And it has to be as fast as possible and work as quickly as possible. And that is what we're trained for. So we go outside of ourselves. I always use the example, we go to see a doctor once a year for maybe 10 minutes if we're lucky, and somehow expect that person to know more about us than we do for ourselves. Yeah. We are doing ourselves a disservice if we are operating that way. And so this idea of, creating choice and not, my work is not about giving advice. I don't give advice, and I tell people that up front. I will throw out resources if you need them, but it's really about helping people discover and become confident in their own selves so that they can trust themselves to make good decisions about themselves. And I think we've just gotten so far away from that in our healthcare culture, unfortunately, that people are not confident in how to make good decisions for themselves. They aren't paying attention to what's going on, even the subtleties. And a lot of my work is the subtlety. So it's not this big bang effect when you come see me, but it's more of a subtlety that builds on itself and cultivates. And over time, it becomes the fabric of your life. And it can have just profound effects because it becomes a fabric of your life as opposed to the one fix.
Absolutely. I think that is the point you just made around people looking outside themselves for a fix, for a solution. Quite possibly is the biggest point that could be made around this topic. It is endemic. It is how we are taught and how we are wired. It is the entire healthcare model. And again, for many things on the physical side, it makes a lot of sense. Certainly, right? When you have a very specific disease or an illness, there are indeed very kind of cause and effect things that you can do as a next step to treat those things. But when it comes to our mental well-being in particular, to look outside and to look for either whether it's a pill or a natural solution or something that you have to go to get from somebody else that's going to solve it for you is really one of the biggest misconceptions around how to address these things in a durable way. That point just couldn't be more important, and very much is aligned with Antidot. We are all about trying to get people to understand how to understand themselves better, right? And that is where the breakthroughs come from. You're not going to be able to read something intellectually and sort of apply some sort of external thing and be able to durably solve some deep-seated issue, especially around things like anxiety and worry and fears and all the stuff that we're dealing with more than ever. These things, the solution really is often, and in fact, if not always, ultimately within, not from the outside. The outside can help us with tools and awareness to get to our insides, to get into the muck, as you said so well, right, and do that work and understand maybe what are some techniques and some things that you can do to help you along that journey to properly spend time and learn from being in that muck. But that's where those breakthroughs happen. That's also consistent with, again, a lot of the ancient wisdom. So, Stoicism, Buddhism, a lot of these other philosophical frameworks, you see a line of synergy between them, which ultimately is very consistent and again, really quite ancient. It's really powerful amazing when you see just how long humans have been dealing with these same kinds of issues, right? There's really, really nothing new under the sun there. The key, the solution that has been proven for literally thousands of years is to do the work and to get inside yourself. And that's where those breakthroughs come from. And much of it is around letting go of this concept of that you can control everything around you other than your sort of reasoned choice or the choices that you make. And also that, the awareness, being, true awareness and understanding, the power of that, the power of getting into that muck and going down to first principles just can't be overstated. There are some who even will go so far as to say is that to solve all this anxiety and fear and existential doubt stuff, even PTSD, all you need to do is actually get to the truth and understand, admit the truth. And if you can just get to that point, it literally solves all those things. I'm not sure I'd go quite that far and say it's just like a belt, but the point is very real. The power around getting to the truth and understanding it and being okay with accepting the truth and then using your choices, your reasoned choices to decide what to do, what is within your control. Ultimately, you're unflappable at that point, right? You've acknowledged the truth, you know what you can and can't control, and you acknowledge that you can let the rest slide off your back because you can't control it. And a lot of the fear and uncertainty we feel comes from this need to constantly want to control everything, control our environment, control our bodies, control what someone says about you, control, when you see something on social media, someone's living a better life than you. I mean, the list goes on, and people wonder why our fear and anxiety and this stuff is worse than ever. think about what we're doing with our brains, right? We're literally living on social media, living on the news, looking, and it's fear, fear, fear. Someone's living a better life. It's a completely false view of reality. Well, imagine how that's programming your brain and the loss of control that you feel when doing it. People aren't even conscious about the fact that they feel out of control. And so again, bring it back to your tools and your learning. This is how you can solve these things, and it's something you can do. You can do the work. You don't have to take a pill or go see a doctor for this, right? You can take a program like Kate's, and you can understand. You can better understand yourself.
Well, and I think too, the other piece that I find often with talking to so many people is to learn to take time to do things that are experiential. So again, that we can feel, we can connect to what it is that we're doing, how we feel about it, finding and carving out time to do that so that we can get in touch with ourselves more, not just be in our heads, but actually get in touch with our bodies. But then also to spend time contemplating, reflecting on what it is that we went through, because so often we're just not a very contemplative society and culture. It's on to the next thing. It's it's a squirrel, shiny object. And so we're not very good at taking time to reflect on, how did that feel for me? What did that do to me? How did I experience that? So that we learn from that. And I think that's something that I really try to work with clients is on, is just carve out time to actually experience something, not just, as you say, kind of read about it, but actually experience it and then reflect on it so that you can learn from it. Maybe it was a terrible experience and you hated it, or maybe you didn't even do it. That is information. That's not a failure. That's just information for you to go, that did not work for me. I need to try something else. I'm going to look somewhere else for something. So it's all information, but we tend to discount it so quickly, or just don't want to even try it.
Absolutely. In fact, it's a great point. And a wise person once said that it's better to take an action, even if it's the wrong action or it's going to be an unpleasant experience, because you will learn something, as opposed to not taking any action where you just make no progress at all. Right. So by diving in, doing the work, uncomfortable or not, doing something experiential, putting yourself out there, kind of sticking your neck out a little bit, and learning, you're making progress, whether you like it or not. You're learning something that you can then pivot on, adjust on, surf that wave, go to the next learning, and that's how progress happens.
And I think too, it's important to remind people that it's scary to think about doing this, of course, but to recognize that you're not alone. So I know for me, when I was in the midst of my divorce and I was separated, and I was so afraid to tell anybody that was happening. I was like, I'm just going to not say anything. And I thought, people are going to notice, they're going to start asking me, it's going to be uncomfortable. So I threw it out there. I took a very big gulp of courage and I shared it with one of the neighbors. And it was the most beautiful experience, because they're like, oh, I'm so sorry. I went through a divorce. And this is a person that had landed on their feet. They've been remarried. It gave me this connection. It gave me some feeling that I wasn't alone in what I was going through. And of course, cognitively, I know that tons of people go through divorce. It's not like I didn't know that, but at the moment I felt really alone. And being able to be vulnerable with that person and say that, and then have the feedback that they gave me, just made me feel like, okay, I have kind of a support village in this. I'm going to be okay.
Incredible. And for those who go through divorce, which is actually a lot of people, I know this, we know, we see the stats, we know it intellectually, but per your example, for those of us who have been through divorces, it really feels like your entire world is kind of falling apart. And whether it was, you instigating it or not, it doesn't matter. It still feels like, if you like a death, it can feel like your entire fabric of what you knew is suddenly kind of up in the air. And it's like someone takes sort of the ground out from beneath you. And I can't imagine a more unsettled feeling that can lead to true PTSD mentally, tons of anxiety and fear and worry, and then coping mechanisms, right? Dopamine seeking behavior and trying to escape it and trying to kind of show the world that, you're okay, you're tough, you're doing great. And actually things are even better. And all these things that kind of come from that millions of people deal with this stuff literally every day because of how rampant that is. And so the case in point, again, the self-awareness tools, the approach is going into the muck. This is how it's the same stuff. It's just doing the same work that you're doing to help you through these things.
Yeah, and I think it's so personal, right? It's again, I don't give advice on what you should do because
Yeah,
I'm not you. You have had a very different experience than I have. The clients
right.
that come to me have had a very different experience, but it's about sharing. Like you with this podcast and your company are sharing resources for people. That's phenomenal. That is all that I want to do too, is be able to
That's all we're
share
trying to do.
resources
Yeah,
and allow people to hear things that maybe they're not getting otherwise.
yeah,
To be able to let them choose on how they can help themselves and what's going to work for them, because I don't know what's going to work for the clients that come in. But if I can
right.
sort of serve up a platter and
Yeah,
say, let's experiment with that for a week and see
yeah.
what that feels like for you, gain some knowledge around it, it can make a real difference in somebody's life. But until they put themselves in a position to acknowledge that they want to move forward and that they are open to trying some things, and then they have a safe place or accountability partner that allows them to kind of process it with them or feel like they've got their back a little bit. It's a process, but that is part of the process, and it can be a really fabulous thing.
Well, I think what you're doing with Enso is so great by not taking a one size fits all approach, right? You're customizing it, you're adapting to what you're hearing from the person, and it is not prescriptive. And that is so important. That is not prescriptive. It is, as you said, it's a platter of these resources that you're applying and helping the person to discover and apply as it's appropriate for their unique situation. Because as you said, everyone's situation is different. Same thing with Antidot. The last thing we want to do is be prescriptive, and in general, dogmatic prescriptive solutions we find typically just don't work, right? Because it's a one size fits all. It doesn't fit a lot of people. People reject them, and they feel like if I'm not adopting this very rigid system, lock, stock, and barrel, and following this specific protocol, then somehow I'm failing. It's not working. It's not a fit for me, and then they give up. And this is why a lot of people actually don't succeed with meditation. They've got the wrong idea about what meditation is. Many people think that meditation is this thing where I'm supposed to be it's a thing I'm supposed to be doing. I need to do an hour a day of this thing, either maybe with this app, and I've got to follow it, and I've got to get into meditation mode, and I'm sitting on a magic carpet, like levitating, and I'm supposed to be seeing vivid colors emerge. Like it couldn't be, it's crazy. People actually think this stuff. And they think they try it. They try, even if they try with an app, and they say, wow, this isn't really working for me. I can't sit still. And they give up. And unfortunately, it's because they have the wrong idea. They think this is a prescriptive system. And unfortunately, these apps as well, they make you kind of go through these multi-day journeys and steps. And if you miss a day or you don't follow, it feels dogmatic, it feels prescriptive, even if it's actually really not, it feels that way. And so it turns off a lot of people. And so people just, I think they don't make the journey. They don't take the next step into self-discovery, these tools, even things like meditation, because there's this fear of this prescriptive approach and following some kind of dogmatic thing. And I love that your program very uniquely, I think, is adaptive, not prescriptive.
Well, and to your point too, of people get turned off. Yes, because it's prescriptive often and people feel boxed in, but also on the flip side of that, and this is something that we need to become aware of for ourselves, is how quickly am I looking for a fix? Are we willing to take some time to feel it out, even if it doesn't feel right? I know for me, I spent 4 years trying to meditate, having all the wrong mindset around meditation. And I would start and stop and start and start and stop and just give up so easily. And it wasn't until it connected with me on, I'm not trying to be good at meditation. I'm just trying to help my mind, when it wanders off, be able to figure out how to bring it back and be more intentional and be more present. And it took a long time for me to get there, but then I had to practice that. And so I gave myself sort of a grace period, if you will, of just being okay with one day it might suck and the next day it's going to be good. And I think sometimes we prevent ourselves from that too, because again, we're trained from our culture for a quick fix. So if it does not happen in 2 days, then that's out. I got to try the next thing.
Yes. Yeah, that is so true, especially with things like meditation. The venture capitalists and guy in Silicon Valley here, Naval Ravikant, who's become a bit of a luminary and kind of an odd duck in a very good way here in the Valley, is really turned into more of a philosopher, I think, than an investor these days, and well deserved. He's incredibly well read, but he has a wonderful way of describing meditation and kind of making it work for you. He just says, look, for an hour a day, literally, whatever happens, happens. I close my eyes, and he's like, anything is fair game. Any thought, whatever I feel is completely fine. It's okay. But I sit there for an hour, eyes closed, and whatever comes, comes. And if you really have that open-ended approach and you start out saying, look, any thought is fine. I'm not going to try to control any thoughts. I'm not going to try to steer this thing or try to quote unquote meditate, right? It is so freeing and so powerful. And you really get to the heart of what meditation is supposed to be, right? Is completely unstructured and unforced. In fact, it's the opposite. You're just objectively trying to get to a point where you're observing your thoughts and being able to see them for what they are, with curiosity and in some cases amusement, and watch them flow like you watch leaves flowing down a river. And you also start to, as part of that, realize just how ephemeral things are. It's like, if my thoughts can be ephemeral, meaning that they're flowing by like leaves down a river, everything else in life is as well. The temporary problem at work, this uncomfortable feeling I might be feeling right now, this anxious, this kind of fight or flight response I'm feeling, these things all will pass. And so meditation is so helpful as one of the kind of core, roots of what you can apply, right, for these kinds of feelings, just to try to get to the point where you can objectively step back from your thoughts, get out of your thoughts. So you're not living in them, you're looking from outside them. And that takes some time. And so, as you said, it takes time. Give yourself the patience, right, and take the time and be kind to yourself to say, I'm not going to nail this on the first try or even in the first week. But if you do this again and again and again, and you're just really open-minded and you just let the thoughts come, you will get there. And it's just like, it's so powerful and so central, because you can apply it to everything else that you're learning. When you're in the muck, you can look at the muck objectively and say, oh, interesting. Well, if the truth is this, oh, well, that's kind of interesting, as opposed to being like swept up in it and caught up in that emotion. So that's how tools like meditation, can tie so well together with the kind of learning that you're talking about.
Yeah, and I will just make note for anybody that's listening that just freaked out because Paul was talking about somebody that meditated for an hour. That you have to meditate for an hour to get this kind of benefit. I will tell you, I'll just share a brief story about my meditation. Once I kind of got over the hurdle of the 4 years of trying on and off, I got into a rhythm of just doing 5 minutes of meditation a day.
Yeah.
And I think I was doing it for 2 weeks solid, maybe 3 weeks solid every day. And all of a sudden I was on this, I can't remember what the app was, but I had tremendous brain fog. So I was really trying to come back from some of my brain fog. And so I was doing some of these brain games online.
Yeah.
And after 2 weeks, I think it was, of meditation every day for 5 minutes, that was all I did. All of a sudden, it was amazing. My abilities and my scores on this silly little online brain games thing went like through the roof. And I knew right away, I'm like, that is meditation, because I could feel calmer in the moment when these things were coming at me that I was trying to, make calculations, or I was trying to remember different things. My whole being was so much calmer. And I was like, wow, that's meditation. So I think, to your point right there, I mean, it's, if meditation is something that you want to try, it does absolutely have an impact on all the other things that touch your life, because it is impacting your ability to regulate yourself emotionally and regulate your nervous system and regulate your thoughts. And all of that benefits life, whatever life might bring at you.
Wonderful example. And your point is so great about the 1 hour per day thing that Naval Ravikant does. That is definitely extreme for a lot of people. They just don't have the time, or I should say that they don't make the time. People could make the time if they made that a priority. But again, you don't need an hour. Your point about 5 minutes is great. I've actually done the exact same thing. In fact, often what I do, it's kind of funny. So I use this Aura health tracking ring, right? So I'm one of these, fitness health kind of freaks and quantified selfers. which is both good and bad. But one of the things that it has a mode on there, which is basically is take a moment, and it's for meditation, and it's actually very powerful. Not necessarily even just the feature, but frankly, I use it as a forcing function where you can set a timer for how long you want to do it. And if you have headphones in, you can choose some sounds like some water lapping or things like that. I don't even do that anymore. I literally will set the timer, have the ring on, and the ring is actually tracking your vitals. So it's actually tracking your body temperature, your heart rate variability, things like that while you're meditating, which is actually kind of interesting, because you can sort of see the progression afterwards. Did your heart rate lower? Did your heart rate variability change? Did your body temp change, et cetera? It's very, very interesting to see because you can see the physical correlation with meditation. And I literally will do 5 or 10 minutes on this thing with no sound or anything. I'll just start the timer on it. I'll hit go and I'll sit there. And the goal, it's so simple. And this is meditation. I sit there and much like novel, whatever comes, comes. Any thoughts are welcome. Any thoughts are fine. I'm not trying to force any thoughts, but I'm also not trying to push any thoughts away, right? So I'm not trying to force myself to think about anything, but I'm also not rejecting. It's this concept of equanimity. Perfect equanimity is really the goal, to be completely neutral and objective and watch the thoughts. You see them come by. So you say, oh, I'm thinking about my job. I'm thinking about that email I wrote. I'm thinking about what I'm going to have for dinner tonight. All those thoughts are totally fine. And the fact that your brain is skittering around between different thoughts, you think, oh, somehow I'm failing at meditating. No, you're meditating by simply observing the fact and stepping out and saying, wow, that's really funny. I just went from thinking about my work email to what I'm having for dinner tonight. What's wrong with me? Nothing. That's meditating. Your objective awareness and curiosity about what you're thinking, and just being objective about it and neutral about it and not judging those thoughts at all, that is meditating. And it can be 2 minutes, 5 minutes, 10 minutes, an hour, whatever works for you. 10 minutes, 5 minutes is fantastic. I did the same thing, Kate, and I had the same benefits. I spilled something in the kitchen one night. It was normally I would have been like, swearing and really, really upset. I found myself almost laughably kind of zen calm about it. I'm like, the meditation is working, right? So it's so funny because you catch yourself, your brain goes to a new mode where you say, I could respond to this fact that I just spilled the stuff all over the stove. Or I could say, wow, I'm feeling like I want to react to this thing that just happened, right? It's an accident. I can't control that I spilled this stuff. It just happened. It happened. So what? And it almost puts a layer in between your response and your next action. And it's so powerful, isn't it?
It's like a pause button, I mean, it's
It
real
is.
pause button because you kind of step back and assess it before you do your automatic patterning that we're so typical of. And I think that's the beauty of meditation too, is it just gives you a space where you can start, again, learning about yourself.
Yeah.
And start paying attention to, wow, I mean, I loved your example of you go from a work email to dinner. I had a colleague of mine who talked about going to a meditation retreat. Yeah. They were quiet for, 4 hours or something one of the days. And she said she was sitting there and she was so exuberant about having this opportunity to just be quiet and nothing bothering her, no noise. And she said, so she was all happy and excited. And she said, and then that moved into sort of like boredom, a little bit of boredom. And then something hurt in her body. And then she started getting frustrated. And then she started getting angry because she was getting frustrated. And then she started crying. And she said, I couldn't believe it. She said, in a span of 4 hours, I went from exuberant to full out crying, and nothing around me had changed. That was all in my own head. And I think that's some of the beauty of meditation, is that we can really pay attention to, wow, there's a lot going on up there that really doesn't serve me. And so if I can find ways to quiet that a little bit, all the better, for not only for me, but for everyone around me.
What a great example. That is like literally case in point. You go through all these journeys in your mind that have nothing to do with reality. They are literally all in your own head. And we can catch ourselves in these self stories where literally we're going through all kinds of stuff. Let's say you see a social media post about someone that makes you upset for whatever reason, right? And you go through all kinds of machinations around in your head around what this person's doing or what you're going to say or whatever it might possibly be, how you might respond. And you can catch yourself and go, wait a minute, I literally am stuck in my own head right now thinking about a response that I'm going to write to somebody on social media or email or whatever it might be. Like, this is so out of touch with reality. With, in reality, you're actually maybe just sitting in your room or something, or you're, walking down the street somewhere, right? Or eating. That's what's actually happening. But in your brain, you're living out this incredible, complicated, stressful fantasy, and maybe you're even sweating, your heart rate's going up. The physical effects are so real. It's all in your own head, and it's completely unnecessary. If you can step back and say, wait a minute, I see what's happening here, but I don't need to be swept up in it, right?
Yeah, I think there's a visual I often like to use, which is, and I've seen it on the internet, but it's a man standing with all these thoughts above his head, and they're all connected. It's like, the if this, then what, or I'm so worried, or whatever. It's this huge mass ball of worry. And then the next picture is the mass ball of worry next to him. And I always say, if you can take, and I do this for myself, take the thoughts and put them on a bench next to you.
Wonderful.
Because that way you are not the thoughts. You've created a separation between you as a person and your thoughts. And now you can look at them because they're on the bench next to you. They're not, they're not on a space where you can't see them, and objectively observe them and be like, wow, there's a lot happening in my brain right now that's not very helpful. So what of those can I do something about? What of those can I let go of? It's creating some kind of separation so that we can recognize what's happening unconsciously for us is just so key to building not only self-awareness, but building resiliency and helping ourselves with the mental suffering that we can often create just on our own with nothing else, playing a role in that. It's us creating our own suffering. So if we can get more comfortable with recognizing that and seeing how we're doing that ourselves, that's sort of the gateway into helping ourselves get rid of some of this burden.
Absolutely. And what a great tool you just described for anyone to use anytime. I love that idea of taking your thoughts out of your brain and putting them aside on the bench next to you, right? And being able to, that summarizes right there, getting out of your own head and being able to look at your thoughts objectively by putting all those thoughts and actually seeing them from a distance objectively, like looking at that little brain or whatever next to you and saying, wow, look what's going on in there. Isn't that interesting? That is so powerful, and it ties to lots of other techniques that people can do for things like anxiety and worry. You can say, if you feel that fight or flight coming on, that sort of that horrible feeling of anxiety coming on, realize it's only your own body, it's your own brain doing that, and it's actually based on a really helpful evolutionary system, right? This is one of our oldest systems in our brains, right, or the fight or flight response, and it's designed to protect us, right, from harm. And back in the day when you're walking out in the jungle or something, and you're encountering a lion, or you're near a fire or on a cliff top or something like that, very useful to have your fight or flight kick in and actually make you hyper vigilant, get your breathing accelerated, your heart rate, all of it, to protect you so that you can respond. But unfortunately, now our brains have not caught up with modern life. And so these same responses happen with everyday, truly non-threatening occurrences, and even come out of the blue because your background brain is worried about all kinds of things like we just talked about. So you can say, hey, thank you, evolutionary system, for trying to protect me, but I actually don't need you right now, right? You can actually do that. You can literally visualize yourself taking it out of your brain and saying, thank you. I'm going to put you aside until I actually do need you, until I do encounter a wild bear or something like that in the woods, right? I'll need you then. But right now, you're basically an oversensitive smoke alarm, and you're being a little too sensitive. I don't need you. And you put yourself aside. It's a very, very powerful kind of visual metaphor to be able to do as well. So these are great tools.
I love that. I learned from a therapist to sort of pat myself and say, okay, that's your 14-year-old self coming up here and having these thoughts. And your 14-year-old self is no longer necessary. We got it. We're an adult now. We can handle this.
Wonderful.
So that's all part of it, is really, again, building confidence in ourselves that we can take care of ourselves, that we have some tools to help us quiet our systems, quiet our minds, and be able to move forward from a more conscious and sort of skillful way in responding to life, as opposed to the patterns that we're used to, which are kind of reacting on automatic pilot.
Wonderful. Well, listen, tell us about the Enneagram. Let's wrap up with that. What is this Enneagram tool?
Yeah, so the Enneagram, I got introduced to the Enneagram in the first year of my master's program. And I've done personality tests in the past, a lot of them, just because I think they're all interesting. This is the first one that really kind of like stuck me to the core. I was like, wow, this is fascinating. And I wanted to learn more instantly. And so it is a, at its very base, and I don't even like to call it because it just feels crass to call it a personality test, but it's essentially a personality assessment of some sort, where there's 9 different types. And it is the difference that it is between other different tests is that it really goes after underlying motivations. So it's not designed to put you in a box and say, these are your strengths, these are your weaknesses, go. It's more of like, here's where you lead with your strengths, here's some blind spots that you have, and here are the underlying motivations behind that. And now you have the opportunity to grow out of that and tap into so many other skill sets. So if you lead with one type, what the goal is to really like incorporate the 8 other types that are in there, so that you can pull from the strengths and the skill sets of all those 8 types and become more whole. And so it doesn't feel sort of like a stamp on you in terms of your personality, and that's just who you are. It's more this opening and opportunity to grow out of that, to recognize, again, bring self-awareness to, oh, I get it. That's why I have those strengths, because I was defending myself in this way as a kid growing up. And so it makes sense that I built that up, and that became a strength for me because I practiced it a lot. And I have these blind spots because that stuff's kind of scared me, or if I didn't have the opportunity to practice that as I grew up. So I just haven't practiced it. I don't know how to do that well. And it can really be very powerful for people. And it was certainly powerful for me to, number one, recognize, okay, I'm not nutty for being this way. There are millions of other people that have this type in common and these characteristics in common. So that, number one, just sort of put me a little bit more at ease, but also that it offers this great path and direction out of that to say, okay, here's how you can grow. I mean, it specifically is, here's some growth patterns for all the different types and what to pay attention to and what to observe about yourself. So, I had a great book when I entered the program, and I use it to this day. This is 5-6 years later now, where I will have a situation where I noticed I got triggered, and I'll come home and I'll, read the book and be like, okay, yep, that's where I caught myself again. And how do I want to do that differently the next time? So I think it's just a really powerful tool to be able to understand the underlying motivations for a lot of our behaviors, so that we can recognize that and say, kind of like what you were saying with the, what we were both saying about, I don't need that anymore. I don't need that right now. Or the little kid for me is like, okay, that's my little kid coming out. Not necessary anymore because I've got other tools that I can help. So it's, I just have found it to be a really wonderful way to learn about ourselves if we're open to it. And not everybody is, but if you are, the Enneagram can be something that's really profound to not only understand ourselves, but understand other people. I think probably one of the biggest things it's helped me with is gaining compassion for other people, even if I don't know what your type is. Because I know so much now about the Enneagram, I can probably pick up on some of the things when you are in your stress place and are having a stress response. I can have more compassion for you when you're in that space. That's pretty big, to be able to find that compassion when somebody else is stressed. And boy, at this time of the world that we live in, there's a lot of people under stress. So if we can bring more compassion, we have less kind of disconnect.
That is so powerful. That is so powerful. And what a great tool, and what a nice contrast or complement, I suppose, to all the other tools like the Myers-Briggs that are so workplace centric. And, a lot of people may be familiar with those kinds of assessments that tend to be to apply more to the workplace and how you interact with others, but less about insights about yourself. Really, the utility of those tends to be more for, hey, how can you work better with people at work? And that's great for workplace, but very limiting from a self-awareness standpoint. And there have been very few, I think, well sort of regarded systems like that. So the Enneagram is really a true exception there, and really rare and powerful. And I love that you use it as a central sort of starting point in the work that you do with clients.
Yeah, and I always say, I mean, I think those other tools are useful, right? I mean, it's anytime we can learn more about ourselves and trying to understand ourselves is useful. But again, just an awareness of what works for you. And for me personally, the Enneagram was really profound. I wanted to, I've trained in it so I can bring it out to other people. And the people that I've worked with, who I've walked through it with, have been in a position where it's really helped them open up not only themselves, but to understanding their partners, their family members, their friends better, and changing, able to change some of those relationships for the good.
Yeah. And I think it's a great example of how a program like yours can be so much more powerful ultimately than something like just sort of open-ended therapy. A lot of people will go see a therapist. You don't know much about the therapist or their background or their pedigree or how good they'll be. It's kind of a personality fit thing in part, but oftentimes it's so open-ended, actually, even if they're trying to put some structure around it, that it can take many, many months to sort of get to a point where you feel like you're getting something out of it. And even then, it still may not be that useful. You almost feel like you're trying to sometimes please the therapist or kind of follow along in the program. I love that your program not only has the structure, but it's structured with room for adaptation, as you said, and that you're using the insights from the Enneagram as a way to sort of help guide in a very meaningful and kind of proven way people through a pretty tough journey like this. It's truly unique out there, and what a great resource that I think people could maybe consider, either in addition to if they see a therapist or they're considering therapy, or instead of, really.
Yeah. It's I don't do it with every single client. It's really the client's prerogative. But I do think back to the idea of sort of the work that I do and the intent and the structure that I have. I say on average, people see me maybe 5 to 6 sessions and then they're gone, which is a win for me, because I don't want people to be dependent on me. And frankly, anyone that works with me will be very disappointed if they are looking for advice, because that's just not the way that I'm set up. And the goal is really at the end of each session, it's sort of like, what do you want to experiment with before you come back to see me? So that it's building self-awareness and putting confidence into the people that I see, so that they can start building on that and they can walk away from me having tools under their belt that they've already implemented that they can apply to anything in their life. So it's very much not a dependent relationship, and it's empowering for me to watch other people become empowered.
Again, there too, that is so unique and so refreshing to hear, because a lot of the things that we hear at Antidot, people maybe who've tried therapy or are frustrated with therapy, not knocking therapy at all. There's some great therapists out there, works wonders for a lot of people. So, but we hear a lot of frustration around the fact that there is sort of implicit, there can be a codependent relationship that evolves, even if that's not the intent. And because it's so sort of open-ended, it can feel very much like, okay, you're on the clock ends, and to continue anything or get any next resolution, you've got to go back on the clock again at the next session. And again, there's no ill intent. It's just the nature of how it ends up working for people, right? And so a program like yours, again, is so refreshing to hear that, hey, there can be an endpoint actually for this, and that would be success. That is really, I think, powerful and unique. And yet you're not trying to do a prescriptive thing saying, okay, you're done, right? We've gone through the program and all the different parts of it, like an academic program or schooling, where you get to the last class, the last chapter or the last class, and you're done. No, but you have the flexibility to say, this person, okay, yeah, it feels like you've made some breakthroughs, that you've learned some new things here. You've gotten what you can get out of this program, and that's successful, right? That's truly unique out there. And I think a nice either compliment or kind of contrast to sort of open-ended therapy.
Yeah, and I think it just goes back to this idea that again, it's back to the individual to find the right thing for themselves. And so, I had a fabulous therapist that I worked with after my divorce, who helped me with divorce and death and cancer. And I was so grateful for her, but she was my 4th one. I had to go through 3 therapists before I found the one that worked for me.
Yeah.
And I think that that was me empowering myself to be my own best advocate, to find the right person that I sensed was going to be able to keep me on a path that made me move forward and not just go in circles. And so there are great therapists out there. There are people out there that you can connect to, but you have to kind of also have a sense for what works best for you, and not just, again, rely on somebody like me to tell you what to do. That's part of this journey that we're talking about today, is gaining some confidence in yourself to step into that space for yourself and ask for what you need and find what you need.
Great. Well, what a great kind of tool in the quiver of potential tools for people to go to get help, but to really, it's around self-help and go on that journey and that discovery to get into the muck. I'm going to use that phrase from now on because I love it so much. I think I'll credit you with that. That's really just such a great way to look at it. Again, it's not a yucky thing. It's muck, but it's the feeling you will get from doing that. It can be just unprecedented, like we've talked about, and you lived it, you went through it yourself, and you were so impressed and inspired by what you learned. You built a program around this, right? And built Enso. So I think that's really a testament to the power of what you've been through personally, but also understand academically. And what a great resource for people to be able to go to now, beyond sort of the things that they might assume are their only options, medications, or just seeing a therapist, or meditation apps and things like that. So there's a lot more out there.
Yep. Lots of resources if people are willing to take the time to look for them and be open to it.
Fantastic. Well, Kate, how can people reach you? How can they find you and check out your program?
Well, I have a website, ensowellbeing.com. It's ENSO wellbeing.com. And that's the easiest way to find me, and the place that you'll find most information. I am sort of an social media person, even though I know that would be helpful for my business. So I do have a Facebook page, and I'm on LinkedIn. But other than that, I don't use it a lot because that's part of my own personal well-being. So the best place to find me is my website.
Great. Well, Enso Wellbeing, and in the show notes here, both on the YouTube version and on the podcast version, we will definitely put links to Kate's web program and website, and more info there as well. Kate, thank you so much for both sharing your journey and educating us on so many things. I think listeners today got a whole lot. I mean, I certainly did, out of both your experience and some of the tools and things that you've learned and brought to the table. That'll be so directly helpful, I think, for people dealing with what they're dealing with now more than ever. And I think even after the pandemic, when it's long gone, these things still apply, right? People have been dealing with these things for thousands of years, like we've seen from the wisdom of the ancients. And so I think a program like yours, more than ever in a complex modern world, is just going to be more vital than ever as we get more and more consumed and living these completely digital lives on screens all day and looking for that next thing and our minds racing. I just can't imagine a more important thing to do than to embark on something like your program, and really self-learning and self-awareness. So thank you for doing what you do.
I love what I do. I feel blessed to be able to do it. So I'm a very lucky person.
Great. Thanks again, Kate. We really appreciate it, and all the Antidot subscribers out there and viewers. I'm sure you'll be hearing from them as well too. We're going to put up a feedback mechanism for this as well on the site, so we'll be definitely getting, I'm sure, questions and things like that. And maybe we can do a part 2 at some point here as a follow-up, and we can cover some of those topics.
I would love that. That would be fun. Thanks.
Fantastic. Thank you again, everyone. Kate Jackson. Take care. Thanks for listening to this episode of the Antidot podcast. Be sure to click subscribe so you don't miss an episode. And also go to the Antidot website for the latest breakthroughs, instantly calming quick reliefs, the free Antidot newsletter, and much, much more at theantidote.com. That's www.theantidote, without an E at the end, .com. On the Antidot website, you'll find everything from little-known evidence-based supplements, natural foods that are calming and relaxing and great for anxiety and worry and fear, getting out of your own head and for your overall health. You'll find cutting-edge cognitive behavioral therapy techniques, ancient wisdom from Stoicism and Buddhism, and a whole lot more. There's nothing quite like the Antidote out there, and it's all completely free. We'd also love to hear from you. Suggestions, topics for upcoming episodes, guests you'd like to see on the show. Email us anytime at newsletter@theantidote.com. Medical disclaimer. The information on this podcast and the Antidot website is for information purposes only. It should not be construed as medical advice. You should always work with your doctor or practitioner on anything related to your health or medical needs.